Yes. And I love that you mentioned that because that's the exact sentiment of my strategy is that while we're kind of in this beta phase with these couple different products, like what can we learn? How can we improve it? What can we create to make sure that they have an even better experience and, the next time that they come around, right? And I think the last piece of that is really that developer success, right? And so when we think about customer success or the same thing when we're looking at account management, right, is like, how do we get them to use more of our products or expand their product offering? Snap has a variety of different, developer products that really can be kind of brought in together as like a suite of products. And so the end goal is like, how do we get them to use that next one? How do we solve their problems?
Hey everyone, I'm Joel Premack, host of the Community-Led Growth Show. Today I'm joined by Tessa Kriesel, Head of Developer Relations at Snap. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Tessa.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, let's dive right into it. Would you please give all of our listeners a quick 30-second intro about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. When folks ask these intros, it's like, what's the most exciting thing to share about me? But I think as it, pertains to your show, I have been one of those folks who just loves to contribute to community my entire life, like bringing people together as a little kindergartner, right? Like let's go play and do this initiative, or let's go dive into something else. And so I think probably the best introduction for me is I am head of DevRel over at Snap, as you mentioned. And for those of you who might not know what developer relations is, or DevRel is a shorter acronym, it's really about community and it's building an experience for developers that is very community driven and gives them the experience and the opportunities and the insights that they're looking for. And so I've been in the DevRel space for the last 6 to 7 years or so. Previous to that, I was a developer myself. It's kind of a funny story, but I actually taught myself how to code so I could build a Guitar Hero community at the end of the day. I wanted folks to be able to have tournaments with one another and be able to play Guitar Hero with other folks that were like me. And so I've been building communities for, I think, essentially my entire life. So it's kind of a high level introduction to me.
Awesome. That's so fun to hear about your Guitar Hero community and like how you got started in that and now how your career has only grown from there. It's amazing.
Yes, it was a really, really fun project for sure.
That's good. You got to enjoy your work and fun little side projects and hobbies. So glad to hear.
Absolutely.
You just mentioned developer relations. I know you briefly touched on like what it actually is, but now I want to dive into a little bit about what's the actual value of a developer relations program to
Yeah,
companies.
absolutely. I think it really kind of varies on the company and what they're looking for, but to really speak to kind of developer relations on a high level, is that developers in general, I don't want to apply any biases to us developers, but in general, we usually can see that kind of sales and marketing coming towards us and try to deflect it in every way possible. And so when you look at developers as an audience, and especially like as our technology, starts to grow and expand and it becomes a part of our everyday life, those that are actually building that technology are really incredibly important audiences, right? And so delivering them the experience that they're looking for to find success with your product. And so, I think really great examples of this is Twilio. If any of you are familiar with Twilio, they have done a bang up job with their developer relations and essentially went to market really focusing on that developer audience and thinking about that because their product really is about building and leveraging their software or kind of technology, I should say, to be able to implement and bring that into your product. So when you think about developer relations, I kind of talk about this in that I feel like it's actually its own org or its own kind of company, right? Because we play a role in a little bit of marketing. We do some advocacy, we spend some time with developers. We don't actually do authentic marketing, but we do end up attracting developers to programs because we do it in a very authentic way. We dive into community. It's very community centric. Developer relations is really the idea of bringing developers together, serving them where they in the ways and where they want to be served, right? And that usually lands in community. We also spend a lot of time with product. And so we work with product to make sure that we're improving the experience for developers. We're bringing back that feedback. We're implementing changes that developers are looking for, and working really closely, I think, outside of that in like an education space. And so a lot of marketing. Actually, there's a really great book that I kind of want to throw out there that is called Developer Marketing Does Not Exist. And it's true. At the end of the day, like developers don't want to be marketed to. And so DevRel is really this function that tries to serve that developer audience while also thinking about those company goals and making sure that both of those are considered. And that we're doing that through content resources, community, product improvements, and just bringing all those folks together in all the ways that they really want to be brought together in. So much more I could share, but that's probably a good high level.
That's definitely a great high level overview of developer relations and the value it brings to companies. So much. Thank you for
Yeah,
sharing that. We're going to start now unpacking bits and pieces of it.
love it.
First bit is, why do you believe developer relations drives authentic acquisition for a platform?
Yeah, that's a super good one because I feel like in the high level, we didn't necessarily break down all the impact, but I think through these questions, we'll be able to really drive into that impact. And so I believe that we do that in a way where we ingrain ourselves in the communities that we exist in. So at Snap, I'm really working with a lot of mobile developers. I'm also working with like the AR industry, which is super new for me and really exciting. But when you think about that, you're starting to figure out kind of who your audience is, right? And so if we took the mobile audience, for example, one of my jobs or part of my job, right, would be to kind of take a step back and figure out where do mobile devs spend time? And more specifically, where do mobile devs that are in the gaming or the AR side of the world spend time? And then what we do is we try to ingrain ourselves in those places, right? And so again, it's usually very community driven. Developers love to be with their peers. They trust their peers more than they trust others. And so it's very authentic because we'll go out and we'll actually seek them out where they're already spending time. So we'll show up at conferences, we'll create resources for them, we'll sponsor some communities. Like I've done tons of open source sponsorships, which is like completely like melts and makes my heart happy because I'm from the open source space myself. But it's really about going into where they're already at and just providing as much supplementary like benefits as we can. So it's not about going in and being like, oh, here's our conference presentation, look at our product, here's what we do, because it's very salesy and that's not going to land well with developers. But it's more about, hey, let me come to your meetup, let me sponsor your venue, let's buy pizza, let's just listen, be a part of this community, see what we can do from a company side to get involved and to drive some impact for those developers. And very, very much of a selfless act, but benefit, right, is that those developers are like, hey, this company is hanging out in our communities. Hey, they're, I can see them, they're sponsoring our stuff. And we just create goodwill with those developers, really. And I think that, when you look at marketing, that's really kind of how DevRel operates. It's like developer marketing doesn't exist, but it does when you're spending time in those communities and you're being really authentic about how you're delivering impact for those developers.
Yeah, it really sounds like the heart of it is it's all about like adding value, whether it's helping them through like
Yes.
financially to like create the space for a meetup, or here's a helpful resource, or sharing something new that you all launched if they're already building and like working with your product or technology. It's
Yep.
all about the selfless act of giving back and like being helpful in any way
Yes.
possible and like what that looks like for the community that you're trying to engage with.
Totally agree, which is probably why I love it so much, because that is definitely my MO is like give back, help others. Like, how can we all kind of win together, right?
Hmm. I love that idea of like winning together. I think everybody should embrace it.
Yes. It's funny because I actually joke that if we all kind of started to think about all of our audience, whether it be consumers or B2B, if we thought about all of them in the way that we think about the way that, we think about DevRel and how we go into a DevRel space, like, man, the world would be a great place.
It would be wild. It would be wildly different, but it would be awesome. I definitely
Yeah.
agree. I'm looking forward to how that plays out now. And I'm like, ooh, we're gonna change the world here. You heard it
Yeah.
first here.
Right? Community led world. That's what I'm looking
Mhm.
for.
Awesome. Well, so we just talked about now driving authentic acquisition to your platform. Next is you mentioned a few ways, high level, about like the best ways to engage with developers. But
Yeah.
what are other things that I guess like make a complete program, and strategy versus just like a single, you're doing X and only X.
Yeah. I think, taking that to like the high level of engaging with developers, a couple things I'll share there, and then I'll kind of dive into, how I think about strategy a little bit. But, when it comes to engaging with developers, and I passively mentioned this, but like they want to hang out with their peers. And so I think that's why DevRel is such an impactful program and offering for companies, is because they think about those peers and they are their peers, right? So I might not have written code for like the last 4 to 5 years, but I'm still a developer, right? And I understand what they care about. I understand how they think. I've been in that capacity and understand what their work looks like. And so I can relate to them. And so I'm one of them, right? So sometimes I think about developers and this in a positive way, but I think about like when we were back in high school, right? There's like certain people who hang out with certain people. And I really see developers as like kind of their own little like clique, and they want to just hang out with anyone that is like them, whether they're in the product side, but they're technically minded, whether they're, in a different side of the world, maybe they're in data or security, but they still think about that kind of technical mindset, and they really enjoy spending time with them, their peers, right? And so engaging in that way where you're thinking about how can I put myself in a developer space and leading with that technical capacity. And so, I know there's some companies who have pulled together some DevRel programs and they grab someone who's a great marketer, but it's like, yes, you can do that, right? But that's not necessarily going to drive the biggest impact. They're really looking to hang with their peers. And so I think that's kind of my big caveat to share in terms of like engaging with developers, is bringing in kind of one of their own. And then I think the other like side of, thinking about strategy, right, is like I can actually speak to the strategy I'm thinking about right now. Is that, very first thing that I'm really thinking about as I just recently joined the team is the developer experience. How are our documentation? Like, what does that look like? How's the content resources? What is it like to actually sign into our developer portal? Can they get access to the things that they need? What's the experience working with our SDK? Just kind of all that stuff, right? Like what is it to be a developer and leverage our platform and our offerings? And so I'm hyper focused on improving our developer experience this quarter specifically. And then really thinking about what is the kind of the next phase of that is like, what does the resources look like? Can we create tutorials? Can we create code samples? Can we create additional educational pieces that are going to help them along that pathway as they start to dive into our product and actually leveraging it? And so again, that kind of falls into developer education. So kind of that first one I mentioned, experience, dive into education. And then, next quarter, I'm really looking at, we've got a number of products over at Snap where we're actually in a beta phase. And so we've got a subset of developers who've got access to it, but it's not openly available. And so really working through that feedback loop, that's a huge, huge piece of DevRel, is like, what is the product offering? What are developers saying about it? How do we continually improve it? And really working through that feedback loop in a cycle, like continuously, no matter whether we're beta or whether we're public or whether we've been a successful product for 10 years, that feedback is so important. And then after that, right, I'm really focused on go-to-market, because then our products are going to move into this general access phase. And then it's about content strategy in terms of like content marketing, right? So thinking about marketing as developers want it, but it's more content driven. It's more meetup sponsorship. It's open source, project sponsorship. It's event strategy. Do we want to, show up at conferences? Kind of working really closely with developer marketing team to drive that go to market and make sure that when those developers come to our products, our experience is just like first class. The education is everything that they need, and that we are driving them to the right places and attracting the right audiences. I think kind of one other area to really think about too, is just like an area that a lot of folks don't think about. And it's something that I like to do in DevRel programs. It's thinking about technical recruiting, right? DevRel spends all this time with these technical audiences. We're bringing developers into our platform. And I think really thinking about that from that community mindset, because that's another big sector of DevRel is very community driven, is like, what does that look like for recruiting? Can we spend time with the recruiting team to make sure that we're able to help them bring in supplemental leads to the roles that they're looking for? And then doing that through community, right? So everything that I just mentioned in my strategy is all very community driven. So we've also got a new community forum that we've launched. And so we're looking at how do we deflect support? How do we provide resources and building up that community? So lots that goes into DevRel, but I thought that it'd be helpful to almost break down what I'm thinking about right now in my role, because it really does give a good glimmer into DevRel strategy and how you actually drive that impact.
Definitely a great overview, and like loved how you essentially talked about like a developer experience. I talk about it in my role to a degree now, like a member experience, and
Yes.
people talk about like a customer experience or like a prospect experience or employee experience too. I think that anytime when one person is interacting with another person or a company, there is room for that experience to always be like improved. And so I
Yes.
love that that's what you're focusing on, because you know from there, like if the experience is good, they're gonna keep going like down.
Yes.
But if this experience is bad, they're gonna like pull back and be like, is it really worth it? Potentially not going through this great experience, or did something rub me the wrong way, or is it hard? Like, are there barriers in which like it might not be worth it, and then they'll just never come back potentially. So I love that you're focusing on that.
Yes. And I love that you mentioned that, because that's the exact sentiment of my strategy, is that while we're kind of in this beta phase with these couple different products, like what can we learn? How can we improve it? What can we create to make sure that they have an even better experience and, the next time that they come around, right? And I think the last piece of that is really that developer success, right? And so when we think about customer success, or the same thing when we're looking at account management, right, is like, how do we get them to use more of our products or expand their product offering? Snap has a variety of different, developer products that really can be kind of brought in together as like a suite of products. And so the end goal is like, how do we get them to use that next one? How do we solve their problems, right? Because that's what developers want, is like, I've got a problem and I need to solve it. Who can help me solve that problem? And when you can do that and make it very clear, I feel like that's when you can really win with that developer audience.
I love that. And I think a lot of people are going to love that too. So thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
Now, one of my favorite questions that I love to ask everyone pretty much is, how do you show ROI in your case now for a developer relations program?
Yes. I love this question because I am such a data nerd. Like, I love to pull data. I think so. Lots of stuff to share here. One thing I want to say is I think that DevRel is really a very like iterative type of a program. And I feel like many are, right? Product and engineering go through an iterative process as well. But I think it's where that feedback loop comes in, right? Because when you're listening to those developers and they say, hey, this is really weird in the SDK, or, my version of whatever I'm building just doesn't seem to work because I'm on X version and you're on, Z version, right? Is like really about that kind of like that, in listening to that and like being really iterative. And so I think that when you think about that too, there's so many different phases, right? So we've got like some marketing going on, we've got experience going on, we've got community, we've got education, we've got that developer success. Like, we're thinking about all those different pillars of DevRel. And so we have to constantly be tracking that data. Did the thing that we do actually work with our audience, right? Do we need to adjust the personas of our audience? Or did we find success and we should keep doing things like that? So coming to the ROI, I like to look at it in a variety of different ways. Right now, things that I'm focused on, and pretty similar to other DevRel programs I've done, is like developer success rate. Are they coming in, getting access to our product, and successfully launching an app? Because especially while we're in this beta process, that's what's important, right? Can they get from A to Z successfully? And I think that that's a really important metric to continue to track, because it really speaks to your developer experience. It speaks to their capability to actually launch and leverage your product. And so that developer success rate is key. I think one of the other, or I should say, I know, working on my dashboard stuff right now, just got off a call before this one, actually talking about it. One of the other things is support deflection for me, specifically on my team. I know that not everyone looks at it from a support deflection side. But I think in general, as you're thinking about it, are the resources and the offerings that you're providing to these developers actually answering their questions and providing that what they need, right? Because at the end of the day, developers could be coding at 2 a.m. because all of a sudden they're like, oh, I'm going to build something cool, and they want to use your product to do it, right? And so you have to make sure that they've got everything that they need so they can kind of self-serve. And so support deflection in my case is often how I look at it, depending on the org structure. But it could be something about, again, feeding into that success rate or making sure that those resources have some type of an ROI to it so that they're coming back to that success. And then I think some of the other things I look at is like developer awareness, right? Do developers know that our product offering exists? Can they find us? Are we a tool that they're going towards? What is the developer sentiment around that? Actually, you know what? I'm just going to pull up a slide really quick because I'm going to actually speak to some of the metrics. I've got this slide that I put in my strategy deck, and I call it measure what matters. And so the things that I measure is awareness. So like, do they know that we exist? Activation. How many of those that know that we exist will actually activate and at least try our product? If we can get them in the door and we've got a great developer experience, activation can usually take us pretty far. Engagement, right? Do they leverage our resources? Are they active in the community? Are they engaging with us? Are we engaging with them? Retention, which I also call is like also known as success. And so I look at that in two different ways. Are they launching successfully? And is their sentiment like in a successful place, right? I know some folks use net promoter scores. Others use, different metrics. It really kind of depends on your org structure, but just making sure that that sentiment is there. When they come in the door, are they leaving happy? Are they launching those products happily? Or are they launching products with frustration and maybe not wanting to have to come back, or not wanting to come back and use another product suite that you might offer? And then adoption rationale. Why are developers choosing us? Because when you know the why, whether why they're choosing you or why they're not choosing you, then you can start to make improvements from that, right? And so those are kind of what I call measure what matters, but it usually breaks down to what's my strategy and initiative at that time. And some of those might speak louder than others.
I absolutely love the last point around the why,
Yes.
whether it's a positive or a negative, because
Yep.
both, like you can spend more time and either do like focus on successful results or you're focusing on areas of opportunity for improvement. And I
Yes.
love that you're spanning like the whole spectrum with that. So thank you so much for sharing that. That's amazing.
Yeah, of course.
Last question, because I know we're a little bit past time, is what are the biggest trends in developer advocacy and community that you're watching for in now 2023 and looking ahead
Yeah.
to?
Oh gosh. This is so hard because I feel like DevRel is just constantly changing. So, some history or some background to DevRel is that it hasn't been around for a long time, but it's also been around for a long time. Apple's been thinking about developers and how they approach them. I want to say it's like either since the 70s or the 80s. There's a really great book out there by Caroline Luco and James Pardon that I recommend that really speaks to that. But essentially, when it comes to trends, I think the biggest thing is with COVID, I think, and you can probably speak to this too, is like we've seen a lot of community centric programs being, started to being built. I think companies are starting to see the value in community because folks are starting to realize like, hey, you know what? I don't have to go into an office. I don't have to go do this thing. And they're just starting to look at the world in a very different way. And so I think that DevRel has really seen a lot of that scope ever since, the COVID and the pandemic and folks being stuck at home. There's been this kind of influx of virtual events, this influx of really thinking about community, and DevRel really plays a role into that. And so I think where some of the trends that we're going to see is that DevRel is going to continue to be a really, really important program. A trend I would like to see, so I'm just going to put this out into the universe, but a trend I would like to see is that I think oftentimes we see DevRel programs being reported, they're reporting to either marketing or sometimes product, which I like product a little better than marketing, but I think that folks sort of look at DevRel as like, oh, we can just like bring in a bunch of new users if we spin up a DevRel team. And as I've shared, it's not just about that, right? Just that acquisition is only one tiny sliver of DevRel. And so I'm hoping that one of these future trends is that we start to see either a DevRel org or a community org actually sitting in the C-suite. I think it's really important that they understand that audience and they understand that their users in that way, especially if they're a developer first company where that's their primary audience as developers, really looking at DevRel as like a very important organization to be at that table. Because today, I mean, I talk to executives, I talk to product, I talk to marketing, I talk to Education. I talk to really all the kind of different functions across the organization. And I think the more that developer relations functions can be a part of that bigger, more strategic, high level company conversation, I think the more impact that they'll be able to drive. And I think it'll start to happen. I don't know if it's going to happen in 23, but I do see that it is being taken more seriously and realizing that the impact is incredibly valuable. So fingers crossed, right?
I love that. I'm also believing and imagining now a world in which there's a chief community officer and then it's
Yes.
split on developer side. So
Yep.
those who are building off of it. And then there's the user side,
Yes.
whether it's admins, end users, whoever, and whatever they want that to look like. The principles and the way community in most organizations, in my opinion, should be are very much give, give, give,
Yes.
and be helpful, add the value, create space, and the rest will just kind of take care of itself, more or less.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that that's a world in which will happen. I believe in that.
Yeah. I think the part of it that I think is so important is that when you think about the, traditional C-suites today, I would say maybe a customer success or some type of a customer driven role probably does speak to the voice of the customer. But I really think that there needs to be a function that exists there that is just, it's like you've got a user on your C-suite, right? One of your power users is on your C-suite and they're just like, no, let's do this instead, or this is what would make more sense. Let me share sentiment, from a customer side. And I think having that customer voice, whether it be chief community officer, whether it be whatever that that title might look like, I think having that customer voice at that table is just so incredibly important. So I look forward to a chief community officer role. I've seen it a few times with a few companies.
Staying, I'm expecting more. So it'll
Yes,
definitely be exciting for us to see. Well, Tessa, again, thank you so much for being on the Community-led Growth Show today. If
of
people want to
course.
follow and or connect with you afterwards, what are the best channels and or handles for them to use?
Yeah. So I spend a lot of time on Twitter because that's where developers spend time. So I am Tessa K22 over on Twitter. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm a little bit less, showing up there. But again, Tessa K22 over there, just, search me by name. And then my website, which I do a lot of blogging about DevRel and community and all things in between over at tessakriesel.com.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much and have a great day.
Yes. It's been awesome being on the show, and I hope you have a great day as well.